Namaste. Bhavantaha, bhavatyah cha. Idanim or adhuna. Pullinga napunsakalinga padanam. Panditaha santi iti mama purna vishwasaha asti. So, namaste, and I am confident, I have full faith that by now you have become masters, great scholars or masters of the forms of the masculine and the neuter in the dvivachanam, dvivachane and asham karomi bahuvachane, ekavachane, bahuvachane api. So in the singular as well as in the plural forms. So with this, let's move on to the Strilinga words. So in today's lecture, which is lecture number 25, we will do a revision of the third person pronouns and nouns in the feminine in the dual, and this is part 2 and the final part of this particular series. So here we will do a revision of the Strilinga words ending with an A or an E and an E, and in the Dvivachanam, and I'll try and introduce you to maybe a few new verbs, and we will also try and build your vocabulary. So let's look at the third person pronouns and nouns in the singular, dual and plural forms, and for the words ending with the A, the feminine words ending with the A, and as we did for the masculine and neuter, this is going to be a revision along with a practice or abhyasaha. Tari atra abhyasaha api bhavishyati, punah smaranam api bhavishyati. So let's look at that chart there. Atra asti ka. So just like we did previously, so ka asti, and you reply with the tat there. Okay, so sa amba asti, ka asti, sa amba asti, ke staha, te ambe staha, kaha santi, taha ambaha santi. Uttamam. Now one difference with the masculine is that in the masculine you were saying te janakaha santi. So you needed to have that extra bit of caution when you were putting the te along with the janakaha. But here fortunately for the feminine, for the akara ending words, it's the same. So taha ambaha santi. Uttamam. And let's do a little practice with the verbs shru, which means shrunoti. So in the dual, we'll do the practice always with the dual for the abhyasaha. So ke shrunutaha, te ambe shrunutaha. And then the niche of that shravayataha. So I've put shrav here because it's easy for you to then know the verb form. So ke shravayataha, te ambe shravayataha. Now let's replace ambe with two others. So we'll just take this on again, and I'd like you to say use the word chhatra. So ke shrunutaha, te chhatre shrunutaha. And now with shikshika, ke shravayataha, te shikshike shravayataha. Uttamam. Moving on to the next one. Kam pashyati, tam ambam pashyati. Uttamam. Ke pashyati, te ambe pashyati. Uttamam. Plural. Kaha pashyati, taha ambaha pashyati. Uttamam. Now you can also use the verbs milati and melayati. For milati, I'd like you to use the word agraja, meaning elder sister. Agrajata, one who was born ahead of us. So ke milati, te agraje milati. Uttamam. And the next one, melayati, is to make them meet. So I'd like you to use the word anuje. So ke melayati, te anuje melayati. Uttamam. Moving on to the third case. So kaya gacchati. Answer taya ambaya gacchati. Uttamam. Kabhyam gacchati, tabhyam ambabhyam gacchati. Kabhihi gacchati, tabhihi ambabhihi gacchati. Now we have the verb dhavati, and I'd like you to make, when I ask a question in the dual, I want you to use the word kridika. So kabhyam dhavati, tabhyam kridikabhyam dhavati. Uttamam. Alapati. So alapati, just like jalpati or vadati, means to speak, to have a dialogue, to alapati. So kabhyam alapati and gaika. So gayikabhyam alapati. Uttamam. Moving on to the next one, which is the fourth or the dative case. So kasyai dadati, tasyai ambayai dadati. Uttamam. Kabhyam dadati, tabhyam ambabhyam dadati. Kabhihi dadati, wrong. Kabhyah dadati, tabhyah ambabhyah dadati. So in the masculine it was kebhyah dadati and it becomes tebhyah janakebhyah, but here it's feminine, so it will be kabhyah dadati. Answer tabhyah ambabhyah dadati. Uttamam. So here we have another two verbs. So prayachati, I'd like you to use that with pathashala, so gives to the school. So kabhyam prayachati, tabhyam pathashalabhyam prayachati. Uttamam. And sanstapika for the next one, which is karoti, does. So I do for that person. Okay, so for those two people. Who are those two people? Those two founders. Sanstapika. Sanstapika is founder. So I want you to say, for those two founders I do, or he does. Tabhyam sanstapikabhyam karoti. Kabhyam karoti, tabhyam sanstapikabhyam karoti. Uttamam. Let's move on to the next one. From where? So kasyaha nayati. From whom does he take? Tasyaha ambayaha nayati. Dual. Kabhyam nayati, tabhyam ambabhyam nayati. And for the plural, kabhyah nayati, tabhyah ambabhyah nayati. So the fourth and the fifth being the same here. And now for the verbs prapnoti, get from. So for get from, I'd like you to say Vaidyashala, or the hospital. So kabhyam prapnoti, tabhyam vaidyashalabhyam prapnoti. And for grihnati, takes from. So I'd like you to use the word vatika. So kabhyam grihnati, tabhyam vatikabhyam grihnati. Uttamam. Moving on to the next one, kasyaha. But here kasyaha is the same as the kasyaha for the fifth, but in the singular, the second kasyaha is the genitive. So kasyaha karyam asti, tasyaha ambayaha karyam asti. Kayoho karyam asti, tayoho ambayoho karyam asti. And in the plural, kasam karyam asti, tasam ambanam karyam asti. Uttamam. So now it's your turn. I'd like you to use the word naika, and here we'll use kala. So naika and kala. So kayoho kala asti, tayoho naikayoho kala. Kala means talent here, or art, or creative expression. So tayoho naikayoho kala asti. And if you want to say grantha and say balika, then tayoho balikayoho grantha, also meaning book, pustakam grantha asti. Uttamam. Let's move on to the last one, which is kasyam. But here the dual is kayoho. So you have to know where is it same and where is it different. So kasyam pritihi asti, tasyam ambayam pritihi asti. And in the dual, kayoho pritihi asti, tayoho ambayoho pritihi asti. And kasu pritihi asti, tasu ambasu pritihi asti. Uttamam. Now let's use the word buddhihi there and see what we can put. So I'd like you to use the word vicharika. Okay, so in those two ladies, in those two thinkers, female thinkers, there is intelligence. Tayoho vicharikayoho buddhihi asti. Uttamam. And finally for the vocative we have he ambe agachatu. For the dual, the same form. So he ambe agachatam. And for the plural, he ambaha agachantu. Uttamam. And let's let's put another noun for the verb khad. So I'd like you to say all three forms with pachika. So he pachike khadatu, he pachike khadatam, and finally He pachikaha khadantu. Uttamam. So let's just do a quick recap of that. So we have ke, kabhyam, 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 kayoho, kayoho, te, tabhyam, 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 tayoho, tayoho. Uttamam. And with esha, what happens? Ete, etabhyam, 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 etayoho, etayoho. And the word amba, ambe, ambabhyam, 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 ambayoho, ambayoho. Hey ambe. Uttavam. So having said this, let's move on. We have here, we'll do the punasmaranam as well as the abhyasa with the feminine words ending with an E. So let's look at the table here. We have ka asti, answer, sa sahodari asti. Next, ke staha, te sahodaryau staha. So unlike the word for amba, like amba becomes ambe, te ambe, here it doesn't become te sahodarye, it is te sahodaryau, like for purushau. So you have to be alert in that case, for this case. Next, kaha santi, taha sahodaryah santi, not sahodaryaha. Okay, that means something else. Taha sahodaryah santi. Now let's do a practice abhyasa with shru here, and I'd like you to use the word patrakari. So ke shrunutaha, te patrakaryau shrunutaha. Uttamam. Shravayataha. So I'd like you to use the word nati. Ke shravayataha, te natyau shravayataha. Uttamam. Alright, so let's move on to the second case, and here we have kam pashati, tam sahodarim pashati, ke pashati, te sahodaryau pashati, kaha pashati, taha sahodar, not yaha, nor sahodaryaha, but sahodarihi, taha sahodarihi pashati. And you have to be careful here, because with the word amba, you have ambaha and ambaha. First and the second cases are the same. But for sahodari, the first case is sahodaryaha in the plural, and for the second case it becomes sahodarihi. This would sort of be like a pattern that we will find again in the other words that we will encounter, which is you lengthen the vowel and put a visarga. So sahodari becomes sahodarihi. The vowel is already long, you have to put the visarga. So kaha pashati, taha sahodarihi pashyati. Uttamam. And let's do a little practice with the verbs milati and melayati. So milati, I'd like you to use the word janani. So ke milati, te jananyau milati. So te jananyau milati. And for melayati, I'd like you to use the word kumari. So ke melayati, te kumariyau melayati, means that he or she or whoever, the third person, makes third person or second person formal or informal, formal, makes the two girls meet someone else. Okay, so tau melayati there. Moving on, we have kaya gachati with sahodari, taya sahodarya gachati. Dual, kabhyam gachati, tabhyam sahodaribhyam gachati. Kabhihi gachati, tabhihi sahodaribhihi gachati. And then we have the abhyasa with the verb dhav, and I'd like you to use the word kridika, I'd like you to use the word pautri or granddaughter. So kabhyam kridati, tabhyam pautribhyam, pautri being the granddaughter, pautribhyam dhavati. So kabhyam dhavati, tabhyam pautribhyam dhavati. And then the next one is alapati. So speaks. So speaks with the patrakari again. So patrakari bhyam speaks with the two of them. So kabhyam alapati means jalpati to talk. Tabhyam patrakari bhyam alapati. Uttamam. Moving on to the dative. Kasyai dadati, tasyai sahodaryai dadati. In the dual, kabhyam dadati, tabhyam sahodaribhyam dadati. Plural, kabhyah dadati, tabhyah sahodaribhyah dadati. Uttamam. And let's do some practice around that. So, prayachati, which means which is an equivalent of dadati. Here I would like you to use the noun tulasi. So, kabhyam jalam dadati, for example. Tabhyam tulasibhyam jalam dadati. Uttamam. And karoti, for who to do they do something. So, for the patni. So, kabhyam karoti, tabhyam patnibhyam karoti, karyam karoti, for example. Moving on, kasyaha. So, kasyaha in the ablative, kasyaha nayati from sahodari, tasyaha sahodaryaha, mouth open, tasyaha sahodaryaha nayati, kabhyam nayati, tabhyam sahodaribhyam nayati. Uttamam. And kabhyah nayati, tabhyah sahodaribhyah nayati. And for some practice we have the verb prap or prapnoti. So here I'd like you to use the word nadibhyam. Okay, so nadi, kabhyam prapnoti, kabhyam jalam prapnoti. From where does he or she get the water? Tabhyam nadibhyam jalam prapnoti. Uttamam. And the next one is grihnati, takes it. So from the devi, tabhyam devibhyam grihnati. Uttamam. Let's move on to the shashti or the genitive case here. And what do we see? It's the same for the singular. So kasyaha, kasyaha, but the meaning is different. So kasyaha karyam asti. Whose work is it? Tasyaha sahodaryaha karyam asti. In the dual, kayoho karyam asti, tayoho sahodaryoho karyam asti. Kasam karyam asti, tasam sahodarinam karyam asti. Uttamam. For some abhyasa, we have kala, and kala meaning the art. So I'd like you to use the word nartaki. So kayoho kala asti, tayoho nartakyoho kala asti. Uttamam. Kala meaning creative work, as I said. And the next one is grantha. So I'd like you to use the word putri. So it will become kayoho grantha asti, tayoho putryoho grantha or pustakam asti. Uttama. Moving on to the locative or the saptami here. So kasyam pritihi asti, tasyam sahodaryam or sahodaryam pritihi asti. Dual, kayoho pritihi asti, tayoho sahodaryoho pritihi asti. And kasu pritihi asti, tasu sahodarishu. Not sahodarisu, because of the e it becomes sahodarishu pritihi asti. And just for some practice with buddhimati, so I'd like you to use the word yuvati. So kayoho buddhihi asti, tayoho yuvatyoho buddhihi asti. Uttamam. Coming down to the final, the vocative case, we have He sahodari shighram agachatu. If there are two of them, He sahodaryau shighram agachatam, and not agachatu. Alright, and the final one, He sahodaryah shighram agachantu. Uttamam. Let's just use the verb khad again, and I'd like you to say the verb khad for nari, let's say. So, He nari shighram khadatu or mandam khadatu. Let's eat slowly. Let's come fast but eat slowly. So, He nari mandam khadatu. Two of them. He nariyau mandam khadatam. Uttamam. Many of them. He naryah mandam khadantu. Uttamam. So let's do a quick recap of that. We have ke, kabhyam, kayoho. And for the tat it becomes te, tabhyam, tayoho. And for the esha it is ete, etabhyam, etayoho. The word sahodari, so sahodaryau, sahodaribhyam, sahodaryoho, he sahodaryau. Uttamam. So practice that, pause when you have some more leisure and go through that in different modes and combinations. Alright. So let's do a conversation with Piyush with the A and the E words. So we are going to be just trying to apply what we have learned thus far, the dual forms, in a sentence using the different cases and asking the different questions like we did in the previous lesson.
Namaste Arye.
Namaste Piyusha.
Sarvam kushalam asti kim?
Sarvam samyak chalati. Yada na chalati tada chalayami. So when things are not going well, chalati tada chalayami, I make it go well. No other option.
Adya bhavatyaha vidyalaye sabha chalati kim?
Adya asmakam vidyalaye visheshaha karyakramah asti.
Tatra paakaha chalati kim?
Katham janati bhavan?
Gandham praptavanaham.
Suvasena bhavatah ghranena ardhabhojanam abhavat kim?
Mama tu ghranena ardhabhojanam abhavat.
Okay, so just a pause there that this is a typical expression, ghranena ardhabhojanam, which means that by the smell alone you have half eaten your food, and that's why in previous times there was this kind of a social stigma of people who were pure vegetarians. They were barred from passing beside the houses of people who used to have non-vegetarian food because it was considered having eaten that diet without actually partaking of it. So very interesting there.
Tatra ke pachatah?
Tatra dve pachike pachatah, dvau jananyau cha pachatah.
Te pachike ke pachatah?
Te pachike द्विविध पूरी के पचतः ते
जनन्यौ च के पचतः
ते जनन्यौ च द्विविध बिर्यान्यौ पचतः
ते पाचिके कथं काभ्यां वा पचतः
ते पाचिके छात्राभ्यां सह छुरिकाभ्यां कर्तयित्वा पचतः
ते जनन्यौ कथं काभ्यां वा पचतः
ते जनन्यौ मातामहीभ्यां पुनः दर्वीभ्यां पचतः
ते पाचिके किमर्थं काभ्यां वा पचतः
ते पाचिके सभाभ्यां पचतः ते जनन्यौ देवीभ्यां पचतः
ते पाचिके कुतः द्रव्याणि नीत्वा पचतः
कुतः द्रव्याणि नीत्वा ते पाचिके स्थालिकाभ्यां द्रव्याणि नीत्वा पचतः
ते जनन्यौ कुतः ज्ञात्वा पचतः
ते जनन्यौ मातामहीभ्यां पाकविधिं ज्ञात्वा पाकविधि द वे ऑफ कुकिंग पाकविधिं ज्ञात्वा पचतः
कयोः सभाभ्यां ते पचतः
पूजयोः सभाभ्यां पचतः पाचिके जनन्यौ नद्योः देवीभ्यां पचतः
ते पाचिके कुत्र पचतः
पाचिके पाकशालयोः पचतः जनन्यौ पुर्योः पचतः
कदा पाचिके पचतः
पाचिके मध्याह्ने पचतः जनन्यौ सायंकाले च पचतः
धन्यवादः
हे पाचिके कृपया स्वादिष्टं भोजनं पचताम् हे जनन्यौ सम्यक् परिवेषणं कुरुताम् इति प्रार्थयामि. Dhanyavada Piyusha.
धन्यवादः आर्ये.
So let's do a quick analysis of that conversation here, and this time I'd like you to try and complete the dialogue using the dual there. So we have ke pachatah, and the answer is, I'd like to say those two, so te dve pachike and dve jananyau. Alright, so very interesting. With the Purusha we had tau dvau purushau and dve mitre. Here we have dve pachike but dve jananyau. Alright, so remember that. Moving on. Kutra kim pachatah? Dvividha, two kinds of puri. Ke pachatah, and for the other one, Dvividha biryanyau pachatah. Uttamam. Katham pachatah? Chhatraya becomes Chhatrabhyam. So with two students, Chhatrabhyam saha pachatah and Churikabhyam kartayitva. Kartayitva, cutting. Churika is a knife. So Churikabhyam kartayitva pachatah. And what about the other party? So Mata Mahibhyam. Mata Mahi, grandmothers from the maternal side. Mata Mahibhyam saha. And Darvi. Darvi is the ladle, the serving spoon. So Darvibhyam pachatah. Next, Kimartham pachatah? Sabhabhyam pachatah. So there are two sabhas going on, not just one. So Sabhabhyam pachatah for the two gatherings. And the other one, Devibhyam pachatah. Uttamam. Sthalikayaha nitva. So kutaha nitva. Dravyani, Piyush was saying kutaha dravyani nitva. Dravyani is all the things that are used for the ingredients for the cooking. So kutaha dravyani nitva pachati? Sthalikayaha nitva becomes sthalikabhyam dravyani nitva pachatah. And in the other case he asked, kutaha paka vidhim jyatva? From where did you learn about the cooking method or the cooking recipe? So pita mahibhyam paka vidhim jyatva. So pita mahibhyam is the grandmother from the father side. So from them I learned they learned the recipe and their cooking. So pita mahibhyam paka vidhim jyatva pachatah. Next, kas. So this he said kayoho sabhabhyam. For which sabhas? So pujayoho sabhabhyam. And the other one was kayoho devibhyam. And the answer is nadyoho devibhyam. So the goddesses of the river, the two goddesses of the two rivers. And today's day it's like very important for us to be invoking these forces, especially of the rivers, because the water situation is so dire. Next, kutra pachatah? So pakashalayam becomes pakashalayoho pachatah. Kada pachatah? Madhyane. No change on that. What happens to the other sentence? So kutra pachatah? Puri. So puryoho pachatah. And kada sayankale pachatah. And finally, he pachike swadishtam bhojanam pachatam. Please cook some tasty food. And for Janani it was he Jananyau sasneham, or with affection, pariveshayatam. So serve with pariveshanam is to serve. So with affection, please serve. Now let's do the dialogue like we had done for the previous one. Let's put all of the words in one big sentence. So you join me there. Let's start. Te dve pachike dvividha purike chhatrabhyam saha churikabhyam kartayitva sabhabhyam, but kayoho sabhabhyam? Pujayoho sabhabhyam sthalikabhyam dravyani nitva pakashalayoho madhyane pachatah. Finally, he pachike swadishtam bhojanam pachatam iti prarthayami. I pray that you cook some tasty food. Let's do the other sentence together. So, before this, dve te dve jananyau द्विविध बिर्यान्यौ मातामहीभ्यां सह दर्वीभ्यां देव्यै, but which devyai? Which devibhyam? Nadyoho devibhyam pitamahibhyam pakavidhim jnatva puryoho sayankale pachatah, and he jananyau sasneham pariveshayatam. So sadaram or sasneham pariveshayatam. Uttamam. So I hope you've got that, and again you can try doing that by yourself again with more leisure. So let's look at an application of what we have learnt in a verse. So this is a very famous composition by Adi Shankaracharya, known as the Nirvana Shatkam. Sometimes you find it written as Shatakam, but that's not really correct. It is Shatkam because there are six verses in that particular composition. So Shatkam made of 6 verses. Nirvana, it's about this great experience that he had of the bliss of his being. So he says, Mano buddhyahankara chittani naham nacha shrotra jihve nacha ghrana netre nacha vyoma bhumir na tejo na vayuhu chidananda rupah shivoham shivoham. So he's saying here, Mano buddhi ahankara chittani naham. So there are a few sandhis here. Buddhyahankara is actually Buddhi and Ahankaraha. Buddhi is written like that. Buddhi plus Ahankara. Okay, so Mano Buddhi, actually it's Manas. So that becomes Mano when you put it in together in a compound word. Mano, the mind, Buddhi, intelligence. Ahankara is the ego principle. Chitta is one's memory principle. Chittani Naham. So they've clubbed all of this together. Manascha, Buddhicha, Ahankaracha, Chittanicha, Mano, Buddhi, Ahankara, Chittani. Okay, the whole thing becomes one composite in the plural. Naham. Naham is a composite of Na plus Aham. Naham means I am not. So, and there become the A or the Na. Next, Nacha Shrotra Jifve. Shrotram is the hearing, Jifwa is the tongue. So that composition there becomes a feminine composite. So in toto it becomes a feminine composite. So Shrotram cha Jifwa cha Shrotra Jifve. Nacha Ghrana Netre.Ghranam cha Netram cha becomes Grana Netre. And Netre here is the Napunsaka, although it's an A, but it is a Napunsaka composite or the neuter composite. So I am not my hearing, nor am I my taste by Jifwa. I am not my smell, nor am I my sight. Next, Nacha Vyoma Bhumihi. I am not the space, nor am I this earth. Vyoma Bhumirna. So here we have the Visarga Sandhi, Bhumihi plus Na. So Nacha Vyoma Bhumihi, that's a ma there, it's not come out. So Bhumihi plus Na becomes Bhumirna. Tejo, so you remember Tejo would become Tejaha. So I am not the space, nor am I the earth, I am not the fire, na Vayu, I am not the wind either or air. Who am I? Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. So Chidananda Chit Anandaha. There's another sandhi that's done there, which is Chit plus Ananda becomes Chidananda. Chidananda Rupa. I am Chit, I am consciousness, and Anandaha, I am bliss. So I am this form of bliss and consciousness. Shivoham, Shivoham. So Shivoham, as we have seen earlier on, is Shivaha plus Aham becomes Shivo. Shivoham, Shivo. I am Shiva, I am this auspicious being, I am this auspicious being. It's one of the very, very powerful. If you go through all the 6 ones, it's like incredibly liberating. Says, I am not the intellect, I am not ego, mind, neither am I hearing, taste, smell, sight, nor am I space, earth, light, air, field of consciousness. I am the embodiment of knowledge and bliss. I am Shiva. Shiva, I am. Shiva, am I. So I'll say it once and you repeat after me. There are various kinds of tunes for this, but I'll use a very simple one and I'd like you to say it after me. Manobudhyahankara chittani naham न च श्रोत्रजिह्वे न च घ्राणनेत्रे न च व्योमभूमिर्न तेजो न वायुः चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहम्. Uttamam. I mean, that's a lot of food for deep contemplation and meditation. On the same lines, I found this beautiful quote about one's identity by Wayne Dyer, who was a world-renowned author and speaker on self-development and spiritual growth. So he says that who are we really? And his answer to that is, we are not human beings in search of a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings immersed in a human experience. And this is the declaration, in fact, of all, I call them the fundamental researchers. They're all those who have gone to the depths of trying to understand our identity, our essential identity. And irrespective of cultural backgrounds, irrespective of social strata or social status, anyone who has touched the depth of a being has made a very similar declaration. So few references there. Shantirastu. So Shantirastu, meditate on these words, Sanskritam Pathantu, and you will have access to a lot of similar wealth of knowledge, of wisdom, and your life will be enriched. Shubham.